Another thing that I noticed this year, and I think that this is a cool part actually of NIL. So does NIL make it a mess? Sure, obviously. Does NIL help? Well, yeah. And it's not so obvious. And this is what I wanted to touch on. In a lot of ways, and this is why I opened the show, and there's that whole opening to this program about like, hey, I believe we're at the dawn of a golden age of college football. In a lot of ways, with the 12-team playoff kind of expanding who can define themselves as successful, with NIL expanding where you can go for opportunity as a great player, in a lot of ways, what we're seeing is the talent dispersing from what we saw, let's say 5, 6, 7 years ago, 3 years ago. So, and I've tweeted about this and other people have touched on this, but let me give you some examples and some concrete examples, because it's not going to happen overnight and it is going to take a little bit of time, but we're starting to see it, right? It's slow and it's moving, but we kind of started to see it this year, right? What did I tell you all year long? There's not a great team, but there's a lot of good teams. And I think that trend is going to continue, even with the usual suspects winning recruiting day, high school signing day, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Miami this year. They're not doing it by as much as they used to. You see, 5 years ago, when we didn't have NIL and we only had a 4-team playoff, those coaches could, and correctly so, say to players, why would you go anywhere else? You can't compete for a championship there. And that was totally fair. And if I was there, I would have used that as a recruiting pitch. But then NIL comes into play, and now we've got the looming expansion to 12 teams. Okay, so a couple of things happen with NIL. If you're one of the top, let's call it like 10 or 20 players in the country, then you could probably should expect that school's best NIL deal that they can possibly provide. That's what you're looking for, because you're essentially like a first-round draft pick, And are you going to get, what the star player or what the veteran gets? I don't know. But you would at least expect that team's best foot forward. If you want me as a top 20 player, then you need to show me that you're going to give me a deal that is your best deal. You can't take a 4-star kid and offer him more money. You can't take a kid ranked behind me and give him more money. You can't do that. So guess what we see? We see top-end talent being dispersed around the country more so than what we saw 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 years ago. Let me give you an example of this, okay? So Dylan Raiola, he was, at least in the composite, the number 2 quarterback. Some services had him as the number 1 quarterback. He was the number 1 player at times during the course of this entire recruiting period. He signs at Nebraska. Okay. Number 1 defensive player, consensus, in the country. Where's he signed? Not Georgia, Missouri. Number 2 wide receiver, Cam Coleman. Where's he go? Auburn. The number 3 wide receiver, Micah Hudson, really good player. Where'd he go? Well, obviously, he went to Texas or Ohio State, right? Nope, Texas Tech. At least in terms of a verbal commitment, the number 1 offensive lineman in the country, Jordan Seaton. Where is he verbal to? Colorado. Now, will he end up at Colorado? Don't know. But guess where he's at least rumored to be going? Maryland. Same boat. Number 1 offensive lineman, not going to the traditional power. The number 2 edge player in the country, this was Dylan Stewart. Where is he going? South Carolina. So in every one of those cases in the composite ranking, we've got these top-end players, the number 1, 2, 3 players in their position, and they're going to places that are not your normal, usual suspects. It's not what we saw in 2018 and 19 in those recruiting classes, where the margin between what Georgia and Alabama were doing at the top, and even Ohio State in some of those cases, what they were doing at the top was like vastly different than what even the number 20 team on the rankings was doing. So let me break it down this way. If you took the average player rating, okay, so if you follow recruiting, which if you're listening to this program, I think that you probably do. If you took the average player rating, there were years I can remember Georgia, I believe, had or Ohio State, one of the two, in 2019, or maybe it was Bama. Anyways, doesn't matter. Their average player rating for the top ranked class was over 95. I mean, an incredible class. Incredible. The average player rating for the, let's call it the 20th ranked class in the country, which is still supposed to be pretty good, was 88.9, almost 89. There was a 5.5, 6 point difference. All right. And then you take a look at this year, and this is the best way to explain it. Let me distill it down to you. The gap between the average player rating of the number 1 class in the country and the number 20 class in the country is shrinking. It's shrinking because the talent is being dispersed through the country. Okay, so it's shrunk in each of the last 3 years. And this year, 2000 and I guess this is the 2024 class, right? I don't know, whatever. I always get confused. I believe it's the 24 class, even though we're still in 23. This average player rating, the difference between the number 1 class and the number 20 class, is the smallest that it's ever been since we've tracked average player rating. So these classes are much more similar than they are different. The margin used to be so big. And remember, there was 6 teams that you would just be like, well, those are the only 6 teams that can compete for playoff spots or even win a playoff game. And we all know who they were. And now I think it's a little different. That doesn't mean that those teams aren't still winning recruiting battles, because they are. And look at them. They're still up there with the number 1 class in the country. Georgia has the number 1 class in the country. Are they going to have a better chance to win the national championship than everybody else? Yep, probably so. But their gap and the gap between them and everybody else is at least starting to shrink. Is there a gap? Yes. Is it starting to shrink? Absolutely. And I think that's a good thing for college football. I think it's a really good thing for college football. As we now enter into this era of the 12-team playoff, I'm interested to see how the combination of NIL, in terms of spreading out the top players, and the combination of that and more teams being at least a participant in the playoff, how that affects the recruiting rankings as we move forward. Last thing that I would say on this subject is another way to look at this is you can look at it as the average player rating. You can also look at it from a perspective of the top 20 players overall in the country. And if you look at the top 20 players overall in the country and the composite rankings, composite meaning you take all the services and you average them all out. Here's the top 20 players as we rank them. 16 of those went to different schools. There were 16 schools represented in those top 20. That's remarkable. By the way, even if Jordan Seaton went to Maryland, it would still be the 16 out of the top 20 players would be 16 different teams represented. I should stop saying 16 of the top 20 players. There are 16 schools represented, programs represented in the top 20 players. That's a lot. That's more than we've seen over the last few years, and certainly from 4 years ago or 5 years ago. And I think, and again, I do believe that the reason that's the case is because if you're one of those top 20 players, you should and probably do expect that school's best NIL deal. Well, guess what? Not every school can give the best NIL deal. So everybody has the opportunity to play at that game. For these players, I do want to talk. Normally, I'm giving information to the fans, but I'm hoping some players watch this. And here's the reason, is because signing days in a lot of ways can feel like a finish line at the end of what was a really long journey. Now, I'm not totally familiar because I wasn't highly recruited, but I do know that a lot of these players that were highly recruited have been recruited and they have been told how great they are for 3 and 4 years, like constantly. And my biggest piece of advice for every player that signed a letter of intent this National Signing Day, whether you're a top 5 player like Dylan Raiola, or you're a player that nobody knows his name, is that this is not a finish line. This is a starting line. Okay? And your future is not going to be based on what has happened to this point. Your future is going to be based on, and your success is going to be based on, what happens from this point forward. Nobody cares once you walk in that locker room. I can guarantee you this. Nobody in your new locker room gives a crap how many stars you had. Nobody. All they care about is if you can help the team win. Period. Can you help the team win? Nobody cares. Work harder. Nobody cares. You've been told for 3 and 4 years that you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. Nobody cares in that new locker room until they know how hard you'll work, how much you'll study, and how much you can help them win football games. Because that's all this is about. That's all this is about, is can we go win football games? Now, are there ancillary benefits? Of course. And there's more now than there has ever been. You should be, I think, thankful in a lot of ways that you're a player in this era. And you know what? Capitalize on that. There's no doubt. Build value for yourself and for your family. But when it comes to that locker room, nobody cares. Nobody cares, because today is just a starting line. And now you've got to go prove it. You've got to go prove your worth. Your stars are not going to get you a starting position. Production does. Your ability to practice well. Your ability to work hard in the weight room. Those of you that view this as a starting line, that view this as the point where you're going to go get something done, you will have the most successful college football careers. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.